All right, ladies and gentlemen, I can see you over in the chat, and it just makes me so happy. Another thing that makes me happy is talking to amazing authors, and I have one here that I just look up to so much because she's changed my mind about a few things, and we'll talk about it. How are you, Rebecca Cuthbert?
I'm so good. Thank you for having me tonight.
Of course, there's a few things. I remember our first chat, uh, I had never, so outside of high school, I hadn't really given a thought to poetry, and you have changed that for me. And I think that's so exciting. One, of course, I'm thinking personally because I keep running into books or these different kinds of genres that I find myself just adoring. One being sci-fi, the other being poetry, and how it just told me a story in a different way that just felt like it was a part of my soul. So, if you would tell us a little bit about this wonderful book. Uh, Sorry, the green screen's kind of messing it up.
Okay.
In Memory of Exoskeletons.
All right. My copy's messier because it's got my Post-its, but if people can see that one better.
Yes.
In Memory of Exoskeletons it's my first book ever, and I'm happy to say it's not my last, but we can talk about those later. And it's a chapbook of poetry, so it's kind of like a small collection. It's 18 poems, and it's dark poetry, so like darker themes, darker imagery, which does not mean that it's all gloom and doom. Like there are some love poems in there, and I think that there are some poems about hope and joy, just maybe not in the way most people think of it. One of people's favorites seems to be about a cemetery and dogs in a cemetery and whether they should or
I
should not
literally
be allowed there.
Go ahead. Sorry.
No, it's that came to me on the way to work because I passed that cemetery and I passed that sign, and I just started like raging against the rule of no dogs in cemeteries in my head, which is the way a lot of these start, just me raging about something in my head.
Yeah. So I was just reading that poem to my wife because I loved it so much. So the fact that out of this whole book, you brought that up first, and now I've, of course, lost it. I'll find it here soon. But yeah, I love it's like, don't bury me there.
Yeah. And
because
now
dogs aren't allowed.
Yes, which is ridiculous. It's ridiculous that dogs. It's called Driving by Willowbrook Cemetery.
Yes, driving by.
And it is about driving by a cemetery and seeing a no dogs allowed sign and getting pissed off about it. And I guess maybe that poem shows what a poem can be. It is not all like William Wordsworth and Shakespeare, that it can be anything you want it to be. And I like that you said that poetry tells a story in a different way. I think that's a great way to describe it. I'm going to steal it. I'll credit you, but I'm going to steal it and share it with my classes.
Oh, well, wow. I thank you for that, because I had no clue what I was saying. I'm very new to this.
It's good.
Well, you read prose, and it's at first you to tell somebody, at least for me, and I talked to my wife about it too. It's like, what does prose mean? And it's very simple, but it's hard to explain. Okay, I really enjoy. Well, one I'm enjoying right now is Christopher Rocchio. I enjoy his prose. That is everybody's prose is different. And poetry is, well, from you being very educated, what is the definition of a poet or poetry compared to prose?
It's like you said, it's so simple and so hard because prose is, something written in sentences and paragraphs. And then poetry is when you have something written in lines and stanzas. So it kind of comes down to the format, like the form on the page. But that's an oversimplified explanation, right? Because we use prose to tell different stories than we use to tell poems. So I think that poems for me work like emotional snapshots instead of, or snapshots sometimes, or maybe even like a 30-second movie, but that at the most, like they're flashes, but they have a lot contained within them. So really good poems are dense and intense. So in a small space, they bring the reader a heavy emotional impact.
I think I love that, because that's kind of how I explained it to my wife. I think one of my favorites as well was about keys. You're talking about these keys in this house, and they could be to a million different things. And some are before my father were born, some are before when I was born. Um, and I think that part of poetry is just so subjective, but just so wonderful. There's so many things you could digest that those words together. It's kind of hard for me to explain. Again, I'm pretty new at poetry, but I felt it, and I think
That's awesome.
that's really important when you're reading, at least for me.
Yeah.
When I'm reading this in memory of exoskeletons, because I didn't know what to expect. I remember you really sold me. You're like, hey, this is poetry for those who didn't know they enjoyed poetry or don't enjoy poetry.
Mhm.
And I think that's a perfect way to put it, because I'm very interested now, because it's a very, I like to say this about the prose that I read, but a punch to the throat.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is that quick, emotional, deep, telling feeling.
Yeah.
And I think that you get that very quickly with what I've read in your book and what I hope to read more of. So tell us a little bit about your inspiration. Of course, I'm going to go there. That's a very foundational point, I think, that I have to ask, like, behind you writing poetry, especially in this genre.
So I feel like this is a long story, because I didn't really like, I don't even call myself a poet. Like, people are like, well, you have a book of poetry out. And I'm like, yeah, but I'm not a poet. And I think that is this kind of stereotype that I still hold from reading poetry that didn't make me feel anything, that I didn't understand. It was like too obtuse. It was too cutesy, or it was you needed 16 PhDs to be able to understand it. And I think that poets like capital P, the nouns, like, they maybe get caught up in being poets, and they forget that, hey, there are people who want to be able to understand what they're reading,
Yeah.
And so I didn't really connect with poetry in high school. I didn't really connect with poetry until college, when I took a poetry class and I got to read more contemporary poets like Sylvia Plath and Anne Sexton, and I was like, oh, wow, these ladies get it. They write about weird stuff and complicated feelings. Anne Sexton does a ton of like fairy tale reimaginings, but it's all dark. It's pretty twisted. But they wrote about the female experience without like trivializing it. And I think that really hit me when I was, 20 years old or whatever. And I still, I wrote some poetry in college, but not a ton. I went to grad school for fiction, so I really wasn't writing poetry there. I didn't start writing poetry until, probably 2015 or so. And I started writing it to take breaks between working on my longer stories. And I'm working on a novel right now that feels like it will never be done. So It's really refreshing to be able to sit down and just write something and have a total draft. Like, maybe it's not done, maybe it's got to be revised 20 times, but there's, it's like instant gratification sometimes to write a poem, which I never get with stories, because I'm like a picker, so even if I revise something 10 times, it's like, I'm going to revise that some more, and
I definitely understand that.
Yeah. So, I revise my poems. I don't mean to sound like I don't, but I started doing it for fun. I just like wanted to try something. And I think that I didn't approach it with any level of seriousness, which is probably why I don't like to call myself a poet. And, why I tell people, this is poetry for people who don't like poetry. Because I really didn't approach it that way. I told little stories, or I just like wrote about how I was feeling, and, you know, wrote about this giant rack of keys my father has. You know, it's I try to connect with whatever a reader's experiences are. And I've had so many people come and say, my dad has that rack of keys too, or like my grandpa has that rack of keys too. And I didn't know that that poem would resonate with so many people. It was one of the latest additions to the collection, because I realized really late in the game that I did not yet have rights to one of my own poems. It was going for publication in a journal, and they had, you know, that period, exclusivity period. And I was like, ooh, I don't have rights to my own poem yet. But taking that one out, I was like, I've got gaps here. So I wrote a couple new ones. And my father has a rack of keys in his kitchen is one of the newest ones. And it's also one of the ones that seems to be like a favorite of the readers.
It is. It's one of the first in the book as far as the order goes. And maybe I don't know, because again, the cemetery one also resonated with me, and that's one of the latter ones. And I think E.L. Montague puts it really well. He says, I think I have more trouble with what people expect poetry to be instead of what poetry is. Music is the best place I've seen for poetry. That's what lyrics are. Yeah, it's so close to song lyrics. You know, it's and if we're like going back before most people could read, poetry was like music in that it was meant to be heard. And I think poetry is still meant to be heard, you know, rather than read on the page. You can read poetry out loud to yourself. You can read a poem to your cat, you know, but it sounds different when you hear it out loud. So poetry does have a lot to do with music. They're sort of like two branches of the same tree. And so I think if people enjoy writing songs and reading songs, because I know people who just like reading song lyrics and they kind of read them. And I'm like, what you're doing is reading poetry, you know? I have to say, I'm one of those people. And real quick, since you brought it up, my favorite lyrics of all time, and I think that you would really enjoy these lyrics, is from a band that I've grown up loving, who I've seen in concert quite a few times, Breaking Benjamin. They have some of the deepest lyrics that they give me goosebumps. I think that you have done something wonderful. You took something that you like instant gratification, something that I feel from what I hear you enjoyed to do and get that stress reliever out, and something that you also felt wasn't like you mentioned you have to have 16 PhDs to understand it, because that is what I remember from high school. Very intimidating to me. And I think I have a pretty good grip on grammar. Like if I find a new word, I look it up. I think I do a decent job as far as keeping up and finding new words. And even it's still then, like I find myself intimidated by who are some older poets who you would say are really difficult to understand. I'm split 50-50 on Shakespeare. I just feel like I should say that and just be honest, because some of the poems I'm like, oh, okay, like I can dig this. And some of them I don't like as much. And I think some of it is just that like your high school years are so oversaturated by Shakespeare that sometimes by the time you get into college, and college is shoving more Shakespeare at you. And so I kind of feel like sometimes it's just like an overdose of Shakespeare. Like that's why sometimes I'm a little bit done with him. And I don't know if that's going to make me unpopular, but it's true. Well, I think the best thing is being honest. And it's funny, you being honest, I relate with that. I think there's a reason 100% that he studied. But at the same time, it's something that when you meet his poetry, I would like to say that a lot of people could relate with me. And there's also people who totally dig it and understand it and love it. It's very, what is the word? Subjective. It is and it isn't at the same time. Like he knew what he meant. It's a different period of time. It's different language. And so now you have to do a lot of studying. Honestly, I don't know if I could name any other. But I'm sure that the names that you
Mhm.
may say would sound familiar to me, but right off the rip, I couldn't think of any others.
Well, and maybe that's a sign too, right? Like they're that unmemorable, but I'm thinking like, and people are gonna, I hope that no one watching this like wants to throw stones at me, but
I doubt that.
uh, like people are so in love with Robert Frost, and
Yeah.
people are so in love with like Robert Browning and John Donne. And I studied them too. I had to study them in college, and I guess I have an appreciation for them because I studied them, but you're not going to find me on a Friday night like reading a collection of John Donne before
Yeah.
I go to bed, Um,
Mhm.
so and I think a lot of those poems, like, Ode on a Grecian Urn, an elegy written in a country churchyard and stuff. It's like those could have been half as long as they were in most cases. It was just like some dude who wouldn't shut up. Like they just like wouldn't like boil it down. You know what I mean? Be a little more concise, be a little more intentional. Like that's the point of a poem, right? Unless it's epic. If it's an epic poem and it's meant to be 200 pages, that's fine. But if the whole point of a poem is to like give you that punch to the throat, to give you this dense, intense flash of feeling, then I don't know.
I totally get what you're saying,
Cut yourself
because
off.
I have two epic poems that really are just like what I'm reading here in your book, and that are like two different monsters. Like, I've so the two that I'm thinking of that I have copies of, and I've really tried to study them, just to further my knowledge. The reason I started this channel is the Divine Comedy, um, and oh my goodness, I can't think of the name. They're Greek.
The Odyssey
And the
or the
Iliad.
Iliad.
Yep. So it comes
Yep.
with both of those together, and
Yep.
they're very difficult to grasp.
They are, and I also want to say that I respect that stuff as roots, because whether people were writing in that vein or against it, like those things were important, right? Because at some point, somebody like Sylvia Plath was tired of reading that crap. Sorry, I shouldn't call it crap. They were tired of reading that stuff. And so they wanted to write against it. They wanted to write something different. So in a way, it still inspired more contemporary feminist poetry, more everyday poetry, because people like me read this really complicated stuff and we roll our eyes, and we want to write something that is more understandable.
So did you get how, I'll start with this question. When did you find your love for literature, whether it was prose or poetry, whatever it was?
I, like a lot of people I talk to who love reading, we can all trace it back to being introverted little kids.
Mm.
So I was introverted, not like exactly antisocial, but I could sit in my bedroom for hours and read a book, even as a little kid. I loved, my mom took us to the library every week, and I loved that. We would trade all of our books in, we would always get the limit, like whatever the limit the library would let us get is what we were getting. And I liked the escapism of it. I liked the peace and quiet of it, that you just got to like sit down and really become enveloped in this thing. It taught me so much vocabulary. People are like, how do you know words? And I'm like, I know words because of reading and like having to look them up because I didn't know. That's like the only way to learn a word, right? Is you hear it and you're curious.
You get invested in a story, and then all of a sudden you're like, I want to know exactly what's going on. And then all of a sudden this word comes along and you're like, I need to know that word. I feel it's important to explain what's going on. Sorry.
Yep. No, you're exactly right. I tell my students, by the way, for everybody else, Matt knows this, but I teach college creative writing classes. So I'm always like, read more, like build your vocabulary. Your lexicon is like your personal vocabulary that you're comfortable using, so all of the words that are at home in your mouth, right? That's your lexicon. And you should always be building that. And I did that through reading. I read every chance I got. I got in trouble for reading in class. Like the lesson was going on and I would hide a book under my desk and I would get in trouble for it. And I started gravitating, and I loved reading everything, but I started gravitating toward like ghost stories and gothic stuff. And do you remember, Matt, I don't know how old you are. I'm 41.
I'm 33.
Okay, so maybe you don't. You're a little younger, but there are these vintage Alfred Hitchcock like anthologies that were all ghost stories.
I can't
Like
remember
Alfred
him.
Hitchcock Presents or something like that. They were old even when I was a kid.
So I don't know about that one in particular, but I know very similar ones that I can picture the cover. In fact, I live in Ohio, and there's ones that's very popular about ghost stories in Ohio. And
Okay.
I found me picking that up all the time. So yes, similar.
And I'm number 5 out of 6 kids. So I would go up and snoop in like my older brother's rooms, not to like find contraband, but I would like take their old books. So I was reading The Three Investigators. It was a series of books. So it's kind of like Nancy Drew, but it was these 3 young boys and they solved mysteries and they were always in danger and all this stuff. And those had a lot of like paranormal aspects. And it was usually kind of a Scooby-Doo scam, but I loved those. So I started reading like as many ghost stories and mysteries and Gothic novels as I could get. In high school, I started reading Mary Stewart, like Gothic thrillers. And so I think that I started writing because I loved reading so much. And when you love something so much, you kind of want to do it too, you know?
I totally can relate with that. Yes, I had no idea that I wanted to tell a story until I read one that made me so enthralled by it or just captivated. And I found this, it's like, man, what would it feel like to be the guy that wrote this? Whether this is an indie book, a trad book, it doesn't matter. I've read wonderful from both. And I just look up to that so much. And it's 100%, not only once, but many times is that on my bucket list to, I'm almost done with an outline. I've found that I'm not what they call a pantser. I'm an outliner, and I'm actually really starting. I kind of got discouraged because I thought that I wanted to be a pantser, and that's how I was going to take it seriously. And then I was, in fact, E.L. Montague was a big. He's actually a pantser, and I'm very inspired by him. This guy. And he's got some wonderful things I'm going to pop up here in a minute. One being, if Shakespeare were writing today, he'd sound like Eminem. Hey, a poet in his own right is Eminem, 100%.
Sure.
And so his dialogue's wonderful. It's something that I aim to do. But I found that my personal process is that outlining these major events, but then giving myself the creative freedom between those events that I know I want to happen, allow me to be myself through my prose. And I'm really just kind of building my process. So hearing it, whether it's prose or poetry, and your influences really helps. But I wanted to throw up. Ithra Munchwala says, no one ever reads my poetry on Twitter, but I keep putting it out there. It's my verbal psychotherapy. I love that. And it sounds like maybe you'd have a little in common with that.
Also, like, don't bet on nobody reading it, because sometimes people, myself included, we're scrolling and we read stuff and we're too lazy to like move our thumbs around, but you don't know people aren't reading it. But I do think that there is something, and I don't necessarily think that writing should take the place of therapy. Like, I'm very pro therapy for everybody, but it is therapeutic and it is cathartic to like articulate your feelings. And it always helps us manage feelings. This is me now, just like, I don't know, being a therapist for everybody, but it always helps us when we can define our feelings. Like, what are you feeling? What's the name of it? And when we can name it, can we trace it? And then are the beginnings of that feeling, are they valid, or are they based on something like insecurity that's maybe lying to us a little bit, right? But writing everything down really does help us with that whole process.
Our brains are on the very much the same wavelength, Rebecca. It's like I'm feeling this, or if I'm reading, especially because sometimes it's not so easy to look inside ourselves, right? It's like
Yep.
based on the story that I'm reading, I can understand why this feeling has come up.
Yep.
Um, and I do that with myself a little bit. And I think that it's so telling that sometimes we may be a little afraid to dive that deep, right?
Hmm.
And I think that has a lot to do with what Ithra says.
Hmm.
And Ryan, a wonderful indie author, I'm reading his book right now, Lost Souls. It's great. It's a science fiction. It's great. He asks, Rebecca, do you have any videos on YouTube that echo your creative writing class?
Not exactly. I've been on a few podcasts and YouTube shows. So I am out there a little bit, and I'm also going to be teaching a class, more than one class, through Psychotoxin Press University, PTPU. So look up Psychotoxin Press, find us over on Facebook to get in on that.
Wow.
So I'll be doing classes there. I've done a workshop before through Defunct Magazine and their Lit Fest. So I'm out there, I'm doing stuff. I will be doing more stuff. And whatever I can share, I will.
I love that. And I also love, reading your poetry and loving it, not just liking it. I love it.
Thank you.
And hearing that you're writing prose and working on this novel makes me very excited.
Thanks.
Buddha Press.
Alien Buddha Press, yeah.
I love the picture. I mean, it just,
Yeah.
it really hits home the Buddha part. I love that. It's very
Yeah.
unique and it's memorable.
Yeah, and the editor-in-chief at Alien Buddha, his name is Red, and Red is an artist, and he's just always putting out cool stuff. Like all the zines he puts out, like he does different artwork for it and stuff. So I think that Alien Buddha is really cool for a lot of reasons, and one of the things that Red does is like he puts out a lot of work, and he gives a lot of writers a chance, like that maybe, wouldn't find their opportunity in more traditional publishing. Like it is more kind of grassroots, it is more indie, and it's such a wonderful place to get a start. Like I would recommend anyone who can publish a book with Red at Alien Buddha, because it's been a really great experience. And Alien Buddha is going to publish another collection of mine. It'll be out in October, and it's going to be mostly short stories, but it's going to have some poetry in it as well. And it's called Self-Made Monsters, with an introduction by Laurel Hightower. So look for that one in the fall.
Now, I believe I've seen the cover to this. Okay, I was just making sure. It's a really cool retro looking,
Yeah,
like
it's so
horror.
80s.
What comes to my mind is Rob Zombie's kind of feel to horror. He's got that like retro, like 80s look.
Yep.
And it totally reminded me that it's a super cool cover, and they're short stories. So I've got a taste of your poetry. I can't wait to get to the short stories, and then when you finish your novel, especially, that's going to be something that I'm really looking forward to reading.
I also want to say that Chad Lutsky did both covers. So if people like those covers, they got to hit up Chad Lutsky. He's a horror author and he's a musician and he's a bunch of other things, but he's also a fabulous cover designer. So Chad Lutsky, chadlutsky.com, hit him up.
Awesome. Yes, that's going to be part. I'm going to ask you for some links because
right.
I always miss a few. So I'll ask for those at the end, especially because I always like to make sure that I hit all those because, it takes more than just people writing, right? Like your cover artist and there's editors and just so many people part of this wonderful thing you're doing. So who are some of those foundational authors for you, if I could ask? Like,
sure.
Especially the Gothic novels, because I found myself really gravitating towards that feel.
Yep. So a lot of them are like classic, as in not alive anymore, but not like Greco-Roman classic. So, so some strong influences have been Shirley Jackson, Edith Wharton, Daphne du Maurier, Angela Carter, Mary Stuart, and probably Edgar Allan Poe. And I know that one is probably cliche. I think a lot of horror writers are like, oh, Edgar Allan Poe, but like, how did he not influence us,
He is, and somebody mentioned him in the comments. If I can find it, I'll throw it up there. But yes, there's been quite a few movies and just natural run-ins to his work, like School, or just kind of things being popular. The Raven is the comment that I found. He's profound. He gives me a feeling of true darkness. This guy was good at what he did.
Yeah.
And
and you can tell he lived it. Like in his head, that's what he was living,
Yes, it was very authentic, and somebody that I really enjoy reading. If I can't find the comment, there it is. Jim McCleary says, I like The Raven by Poe, but don't quote me on it.
It's pretty good fun. Pretty good, Jim.
I'll have to reread that soon. And I can't remember what Netflix just did a movie. It was so good. Actually, Poe was in the rendition of Poe. The actor playing Poe was in it. It was really good. I have to I don't remember it, but it was really good.
Was it the Ethan Hawke movie?
No, it wasn't Ethan Hawke. It was the guy that played in the Psycho, I believe. Can't remember his name. It'll come to me, and I'll have to shout it out to you when I remember it.
Okay.
Because it was so good. Me and my wife watched it, and we're just like, we were already fans of Poe, and then it's just like seeing a semi-realistic version of what he would have done during this time. It was actually the actor that played Dudley in Harry Potter.
Okay.
The fat little kid that always made fun of him at home. And he did a wonderful job. What are we may have already kind of touched this a little bit, looking through my questions here. So knowing a guy like me who is pretty new to poetry as far as like really taking it as something I enjoy, who are some poets that you would recommend for me?
So one of the poets who I often recommend to people who are getting into poetry for its accessibility is Matthew Olsman. He has this really great collection. I think it's called Mezzanines. And there are funny poems, but everything is so easy to connect to, and it's so enjoyable to read. So Matthew Olsman, and also Jessica McHugh. Now she does something different. Jess does blackout poetry. So she takes these texts, like she's done a whole collection of blackout poems from Little Women, one from The Secret Garden, and one from Frankenstein. And they're so great because she takes this work that already exists and then she plucks from it, right? Like these words on the page that she fits together for a poem that is just cutting and has such a strong voice to it. And I don't know how she does it. I would love to try it sometime, but right now I just admire Jess for what she can do with blackout poetry. So definitely Jess and definitely Matthew Olsman, just for people to get into it.
I'm going to be checking those out for sure. So I know you touched a little bit. You went to the library a lot as a kid. I find myself really kind of jealous at that because I didn't find that I loved reading and wanted to write until I was 29. I'm 33. And I think that having that love as a younger person really helps you to get that imagination, that creative limb. It really helps you. Would you mind telling me a few, because I'm looking for recommendations myself. I know this is kind of a little bit of a repeat question, but I would love to hear some of those foundational authors as far as like who got you into reading.
Oh gosh, who got me into reading? I don't know that I could tell you because it goes so far back. It's like, what were your first words? I have no idea. It goes so far back. I love, you know what I did love, and I do remember it sticks out to me is, and it's really famous, Chicka Chicka Boom Boom. It's for little kids. It's a
Yes.
little kid's book. And I remember reading it as a little kid and thinking how fun it was. And I wonder if, like, my current self's poetry is actually, if we could trace it all the way back to something like that that was fun. It was like poetry was fun as a little kid, and then you got into high school and it was less fun. And so
Absolutely. No, that
yeah,
makes perfect sense.
yeah.
Tell us a little about. I'm trying to think as
Oh,
far as. Go
I
ahead.
should say sorry. I was talking about those like the older authors who write
Yes.
Gothic stuff, but there are some contemporary, like living right now authors who are doing just such cool stuff with the Gothic. And I
Ooh.
love them. I'm a huge fan. I'm like a little jealous, but I will just like give me more, give me more. Right now,
Yes.
I'm reading Vampires of El Norte by Isabel Cañas, and her stuff is so great. She also wrote The Hacienda. So it's like as Gothic gets. So definitely read her. I love Tanana Reeve Dew. She does a lot of ghost stories, a lot of really spooky stuff, and she's very prolific. So Tanana Reeve Dew is a great one. Sarah Waters, one of the best books I've ever read is called The Little Stranger by Sarah Waters. So
Ooh.
creepy, so Gothic. I mean, it kept me up at night. It actually scared me, and it takes a lot for a book to scare me.
Yes.
Then we've got Sylvia Moreno Garcia. So good. Rachel Harrison is doing some really cool stuff, and also Catriona Ward. So
Oh,
those are
yes.
some authors to check out if you're like into the Gothic. Oh, I forgot another good one. The Historian by Elizabeth Kostova, but you can't be scared away by the length. It's like an 800-page novel. Okay.
That
The
is a
Historian.
wonderful trait to
But it
me.
is such a, I mean, I think that I stayed up. I don't think I slept for 3 days straight when I
Oh my
read that,
gosh.
because I read it like when I had to go to work. I was sad to leave The Historian behind. I would come home, shower the grease of my waitressing job off of me and then get right back to The Historian. So Elizabeth Kostova's The Historian is so good.
I was so excited to ask you those questions because I find myself, and I haven't done a lot of research, mind you,
Mhm.
I find myself in these moments like talking to you, realizing how much I love like gaslamp fantasy or gothic, that gothic feel. Um,
Yep.
and it's not, I guess I just don't think about it often until I'm really kind of in the space, right? And I hear you're in an author's inspirations. I feel like I've gotten so many though. I've tried to write down as many as I could. Um, Ryan wants to know if you have an absolute favorite author.
I don't think I do. It's so hard. And by the way, it's not just about authors. Like if people were like, "What's your favorite food?" I couldn't answer either.
Right.
I don't know if I'm too indecisive or I just like too many things. I don't know.
It's a
Um,
hard question.
yeah, but if somebody said, "What are the best books you've ever read?"
Mm,
which is maybe a little bit different of a question, and I can't say the best book because I won't. Two books, it's like oranges to apples, right? It's like different genre, different characters. How can you compare? But The Little Stranger by Sarah Waters, The Historian by Elizabeth Kostova, Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier, The Shipping News. Now, this is a different genre, but it's still kind of creepy. It's sort of an eerie book. It's so good. The Shipping News by Annie Proulx. And she
ooh,
has that last name where there's an X at the end that you can't hear. It's like Proulx.
uh-huh.
And another one is, and again, this is not Gothic either. It's just a really wonderful novel. It's called Waterland, and I think it's by Graham Swift.
Ooh,
So, but I was like, if somebody were like, name, 5 excellent books, I think I named 5. I
yeah.
think those would
I
be the
think
ones I
that's an
named.
easier question for me.
Yeah.
The kind of thinking about it, it's like, I think I have authors that I really like, but I think I could name books because they're all different stories that maybe that author doesn't tell a bunch of the stories that resonate with you. So I think
Yeah.
that is a great question.
Okay.
So I would love to hear, we touched a little bit on it, but kind of what is next for you?
I got a list, and
Yay.
just like by chance, I wrote it all down today. I had some time and I was like, all right, what's in 2024?
Mm-hmm.
So this is not quite chronological order, but in January, I have a new book coming out. It's nonfiction. And
Oh, wow.
it's going to be with Seamus and Nunzio Productions. It's called Creep This Way, How to Become a Horror Writer with 24 Tips to Get You Ghouling.
Wow.
So it's kind of half memoir, half how-to. It's for people who want to break into horror writing but don't really know where to start. Then we've got Self-Made Monsters, my hybrid poetry and fiction collection coming out in the fall. I've got a couple more titles that are scheduled, but I can't announce them yet because they're not signed on the dotted line yet. But
Sure, I get it.
I've got some more coming out between 24 and 25. So I'm excited about those. I was recently invited to be the editor-in-chief of a new feminist horror imprint at Psychotoxin Press called Psychotoxin Pink. We open soon for submissions. So I'll be reading for that. Very excited about that opportunity.
Yes.
I'm working on a new collection of poetry called It's Always a Demon and Other Poems. And the title track poem from that is going to be in the January edition of a magazine called Dusty Attic.
Okay.
So It's Always a Demon will be out soon. Then I've got another collection I'm working on. This is all fiction, and it's called The Hauntings Back Home. It is all about hauntings and ghost stories. So it's going to be 13 ghost stories with the introduction and 13th story by author and my buddy, Jonathan Gensler.
Awesome.
I've got my half-done novel, which is the first book of a planned trilogy. So really hoping that not only can I finish book 1, but get started on book 2 and find the whole series a home.
Yeah.
I've got a literary speculative fiction collection called 6 O'Clock House and Other Strange Tales out on Sub right now. And I also have a children's horror picture book out on submission right now.
Oh my gosh.
Let's see if that gets picked up. So I've got a lot going on. I'm excited about the year.
This is one of my favorite questions because usually through a interview, I get a little bit of a taste of what's coming up, but I like to kind of hit it home at the end, like, let's hear what's really coming out. And that makes me really excited. I like what you're doing. I like what you like, that gothic feel, that horror aspect. And I need more of that in my life. So I'm really excited to hear that you're coming out with more. I think we're going to chat a few times on this channel.
Awesome.
Yes. Just based on...
I'm not going to say the title of it, okay? And I'm not going to say the publisher. But I will say that a gothic novella is scheduled for 25 release. So
that's exciting.
We can talk about that more later.
Yes, absolutely. 100%. I never pick people to chat with on my channel that I won't have back. I plan on having everybody back that I chat with, because I find this, whether it's a theme or a trope or just common interests that really excite me. So very much looking forward to everything that you're going to have out, guys. This collection of poems really made me a fan of poetry, and she does a wonderful job of really punching me in the throat, if you will. So that's fun to hear what's coming up next. We will talk a little bit afterwards. I'll have some wonderful links in my description because I've heard a lot that I don't have already. I will have those in the description. And lastly, I would like to hear some people who you really like that you would like to see me chat with in the future.
Okay, so I started making this list. The list got a lot longer, but okay, ready? So, she's so fun, and you gotta get her on. If you get her to do impressions, you should get her to do impressions. And she's got books out, got books, she's always busy. And then if anybody is super fun, it's great. Then I recommend Jenny Kiefer.
One second. For some reason, oh, I think we've lost her. We'll stick around for a little bit and see if she pops back in there. I couldn't really hear her there at the end. I'm gonna give her a chance to pop back in here though. But guys, really have been enjoying her collection of poetry. It's funny because when I first started this channel, like things like this would happen or like this would die, right? I'm sure that you've been there when it's died because it's happened a few times. Sometimes I forget to plug it in. But yeah, if she doesn't pop in, I'll make sure that I do get a hold of her and have in, I believe she called it the, gosh, I can't remember, the psycho. Look, I'm not the fastest writer of things as I'm sitting here listening. I try to be, and I aim to be, but that is a skill I am working on. So if she doesn't pop back in here, I will have all of those links to the website she's talking about, Alien Buddha Press, which I have to tell you, I'm really excited to have. I love these small presses. Okay, you've got like. Well, it's a bigger press, of course, but like Angry Robot, you've got like Stephen Arian, and you've got like the Alien Buddha Press. I found her, and I'm excited to hear more about the authors under that press because it's not easy, guys, to be a small press. I talked with Adrian Collins last night, and at Grimdark Magazine, who, man, is just doing a wonderful thing himself. And how hard it is to get these publications out. Costly. They're costly, guys. There's authors, there's editors, there's cover artists, there's so many more. There's formatting in the book. There's many of these things that we don't necessarily think of when we're just readers. And that's what I came into this experience as, is just a reader. And through this channel and through you guys in the comments and your suggestions and the people I talk with, I've just really found out that it's much more than that. And like I said, that's what I'm after within this with this channel, just that learning. Because I want to do it myself, and I know so many others do. And I think even if you're not, yes, there we go, the horror connection, Psychotoxin Press, yes. That is exactly what it is. Yes, 100% Ithra. I have sent my message. He is down with coming on the channel. I know he's a busy guy. He'll get back to me with a date, but I'm going to have him on the channel. And I know that through you and your posts on Twitter. I believe I seen on my phone she did lose the feed, which, hey, that happens, guys. So just to kind of finish this up, like I said, I'll have those links in the description, and I just want to thank Rebecca Cuthbert for being here. I hope she's listening, and I thank you guys for always being here. And one of my favorite things is seeing you guys in the chat before we come on. It's very exciting, and some of the same names come up, a lot of the same names come up, and I just really appreciate you. So just know that, and that's why I keep doing this. I love what I'm doing here and talking to authors and learning more and just kind of expanding my mind into other things. And I'm glad that you guys are on this ride with me. So until next time, guys, thank you so much for being here. Whoever watches in the future, thank you so much. And until next time, tomorrow I will be talking with Jim Wilburn, and he is so enthusiastic, right? His channel is great. His writing is great. He seems like such a fun person to talk with. And then Saturday, I will be talking with Christopher Rocchio. Man, just somebody that a year ago, if you'd have told me that I'd be reading sci-fi, I'd be like, probably not. There's a few people who have changed my mind. Ryan, I know you're still here probably. And yep, right there. You are one of them who keep encouraging me more and more to. I'm reading 2 sci-fi books at the moment, and my mind's blown. So I love what you guys are doing in that realm, the sci-fi realm, and I'll keep reading more. I just can't get enough of it. So thank you again for being here. Thank you, Rebecca. And we'll see you tomorrow with Jim and Saturday with Christopher Rocchio. And until then, have a wonderful day, night, morning, wherever you're at, and we'll see you then.